I just have to make a comment here that the same battle is going on today. Yes, the papacy may have lost her 1260-year reign, overt reign, which we are speaking of here in this history. But she now rules in secret by a shadow government in the world. And the same struggle is going on in England today. England has almost been conquered by her, and they do not even know the battle that they are fighting and whom they are fighting with, because the head wound has been healed fully. And the eighth king, beast, in succession, doth rule today as ruled then, but with intrigue and many layers of deniable culpability. Is there any hope? Yes, there is hope. The scripture gives us that hope in the Revelation. It says that the 10 divisions of Western Europe, depicted as horns on the beast, the 10 divisions, the 10 horns of Western Europe will turn on the whore and raze her to the ground, destroy her with fire, totally wipe her off the face of the earth. That God is going to put it in their heart to do this thing. And I long for the day, and I pray that is not far off, because we're talking about the same struggle that Great Britain was fighting then that is coming to a head now. Only now she does not recognize her enemy. May God open her eyes. May God open the eyes of Western Europe to see who their enemy really is, who is now destroying their countries and destroying their religion. Yes, their Christian religion. It is the same enemy as of old, only now working behind the scene through intrigue by her shadow government. And I pray to God to open their eyes. And I'm praying for something that I know will happen. But the sooner I see it, the happier I will be. Because I know once that happens, that the coming of the Lord is even that much closer. Yeah. So we look for that to happen. Okay. Well, there's my little aside. And chapter 2... I'm going to back up one paragraph here. And we were talking about the signing of the Great Charter, the Magna Carta. So we're going to continue. In the signing of the Great Charter, we see a new force coming into the field to make war against that tyranny which first corrupted the souls of men before it enslaved their bodies. The divine or evangelic element came first. Political liberty came after, and the former is the true nurse of the latter. For in no country can liberty endure and ripen its fruit where it has not had its beginning in the moral part of man. Innocent was already contending against the evangelical principle in the Crusades against the Albigenses in the south of France, and now there appeared among the hardy nations of the north another antagonist, the product of the first, that had come to strengthen the battle against a power which from its seat on the 7 hills was absorbing all rights and enslaving all nations. The bold attitude of the barons saved the independence of the nation. Innocent went to the grave. Feebler men succeeded him in the pontifical chair. The kings of England mounted the throne without taking the oath of fealty to the Pope, although they continued to transmit, year by year, the 1,000 marks which John had agreed to pay into the papal treasury. At last, in the region of Edward II, this annual payment was quietly dropped. No remonstrance against its discontinuance came from Rome. But in 1365, after the payment of the 1,000 marks had been intermitted for 35 years, it was suddenly demanded by Pope Urban V. The demand was accompanied with an intimation that should the king, Edward III, fail to make payment, not only of the annual tribute, but of all arrears, he would be summoned to Rome to answer before his liege lord, the Pope, for his defiance. This was, in effect, to say to England, prostrate yourself a second time before the pontifical chair. The England of Edward III was not the England of King John, and this demand, as unexpected as it was insulting, stirred the nation to its depths. During the century which had elapsed since the great Charter was signed, England's growth in all the elements of greatness had been marvelously rapid. She had fused Norman and Saxon into one people. She had formed her language. She had extended her commerce. She had reformed her laws. She had founded seats of learning, which had already become renowned. She had fought great battles and won brilliant victories. Her valor was felt and her power feared by the continental nations. And when this summons to do homage as a vassal of the Pope was heard, the nation hardly knew whether to meet it with indignation or with derision. What made the folly of Urban's demand the more conspicuous was the fact that the political battle against the papacy had been gradually strengthening since the era of the Magna Charta. Several stringent acts had been passed with the view of vindicating the majesty of the law and of guarding the property of the nation and of the liberty of the subject against the persistent and ambitious encroachments of Rome. Nor were these acts unneeded. Swarm after swarm of aliens, chiefly Italians, had invaded the kingdom, and were devouring its substance and subverting its laws. Foreign ecclesiastics were nominated by the Pope to rich livings in England, and although they neither resided in the country nor performed any duty in it, they received the revenues of their English livings and expended them abroad. For instance, in the 16th year of Edward III, 2 Italian cardinals were named to 2 vacancies in the dioceses of Canterbury and York, worth annually 2,000 marks, the first fruits and reservations of the Pope, said the men of those times, are more hurtful to the realm than all the king's wars. In a parliament held in London in 1246, we find it complained of, among other grievances, that the Pope, not content with Peter's pence, oppressed the kingdom by extorting from the clergy great contributions without the king's consent, that the English were forced to prosecute their rights out of the kingdom, against the customs and written laws thereof, that oaths, statutes, and privileges were enervated, and that in the parishes where the Italians were beneficed, there were no alms, no hospitality, no preaching, no divine service, no care of souls, nor any reparation done to the parsonage houses. A worldly dominion cannot stand without revenues. The ambition and the theology of Rome went hand in hand, and supported one another. Not an article was there in her creed, not a ceremony in her worship, not a department in her government, which did not tend to advance her power and increase her gain. Her dogmas, rites, and orders were so many pretexts for exacting money. Images, purgatory, relics, pilgrimages, indulgences, jubilees, canonizations, miracles, masses were but taxes under another name. Tithes, annats, investitures, appeals, reservations, expectatives, bulls, and briefs were so many drains for conveying the substance of the nations of Christendom to Rome. Every new saint cost the country of his birth 100,000 crowns. A consecrated pall for an English archbishop was bought for £1,200. In the year 1250, Walter Gray, Archbishop of York, paid £10,000 for that mystic ornament, without which he might not presume to call councils, make chrism, dedicate churches, or ordain bishops and clerks. According to the present value of money, the price of this trifle may amount to £100,000. And of course, we're talking about money 150 years ago here. With good reason, might the Carmelite Baptista Mantuan say, if Rome gives anything, it is trifles only. She takes your gold, but gives nothing more solid in return than words. Alas, Rome is governed only by money. These and similar usurpations were rapidly converting the English soil into an Italian globe. The land was tilled that it might feed foreign monks, and Englishmen were becoming hewers of wood and drawers of water to the Roman hierarchy. If the cardinals of Rome must have sumptuous banquets, and purple robes, and other and more questionable delights, is it not we, said the English people, which ought to be fleeced to furnish these things? We demand that a stop be put to this ruinous game before we are utterly beggared by it. To remedy these grievances, now become intolerable, a series of enactments were passed by Parliament. In the 20th year of Edward's reign, all alien monks were ordered to depart the kingdom by Michaelmas, and their livings were given to English scholars. By another act, the salaries of all foreign ecclesiastics, cardinals, and others were given to the kings during their lives. It was further enacted, and the statute shows the extraordinary length to which the abuse had gone, that all such alien enemies as be advanced to livings here in England, being in their own country shoemakers, tailors, or chamberlains to cardinals, should depart for before Michaelmas, and their livings be disposed to poor English scholars. The payment of 2,000 marks to the two cardinals already mentioned was stopped. It was enacted further that no Englishman should bring into the realm to any bishop or other any bull or other letters from Rome, or any alien, unless he show the same to the chancellor or warden of the Cinque Ports upon loss of all he hath. One person, not having the fear of the statute before his eyes, ventured to bring a papal bull into England, but he had nearly paid the forfeit of his life for his rashness. He was condemned to the gallows, and would have been hanged but for the intercession of the chancellor. We can hardly wonder at the popular indignation against these abuses when we think of the host of evils they brought in their train. The power of the king was weakened. The jurisdiction of the tribunals was invaded. The exchequer was impoverished. It was computed that the tax paid to the Pope for ecclesiastical indignities was fivefold that paid to the king from the whole realm. And further, as the consequence of this transportation to other countries of the treasure of the nation, learning and the arts were discouraged, hospitals were falling into decay, the churches were becoming dilapidated, public worship was neglected, the lands were falling out of tillage, and to this cause the Parliament attributed the frequent famines and plagues that had of late visited the country, and which had resulted in a partial depopulation of England. Two statutes in particular were passed during this period to set bounds to the papal usurpations. These were the well-known and famous statutes of Provisors and Praemunire. The first declared it illegal to procure any presentations to any benefice from the court of Rome, or to accept any living otherwise than as the law directed through the chapters and ordinary electors. All such appointments were to be void. The parties concerned in them were to be punished with fine and imprisonment, and no appeal was allowed beyond the king's court. The second statute, which came 3 years afterward, forbade all appeals on questions of property from the English tribunals to the courts of Rome, under pain of confiscation of goods and imprisonment during the king's pleasure. Such appeals had become very common, and by the vigorous application of the statute they came to an end. But the law against foreign nominations to benefices was not easy to enforce, and the enactment, although it abated, did not abolish the abuse. Chapter 3. Wickliffe battles for English independence from Rome. Impatient of the king and nations. Assembling of lords and commons. Shall England bow to Rome? The debate. The Pope's claim unanimously repudiated. England on the road to Protestantism. Wickliffe's influence. Wickliffe attacked by an anonymous monk. His reply vindicates the nation's independence. A momentous issue, a greater victory than Crecy. His appeal to Rome lost. Begins to be regarded as the center of a new age. When England began its papal resistance, it was growing in power and wealth. Loosing its neck from the yoke of Rome, it lifted up its head proudly among the nations. Innocent III, crowning a series of usurpations by the submission of King John, an act of baseness that stands alone in the annals of England, had sustained himself master of the kingdom. But the great pontiff was bidden, somewhat gruffly, to stand off. The northern nobles, who knew little about theology, but cared a great deal for the independence, would be masters in their own isle, and they let the haughty wearer of the tiara know this when they framed Magna Charta. Turning to King John, they told him, in effect, that if he was to be the slave of an Italian priest, he could not be the master of Norman barons. The tide once turned continued to flow. The two famous statutes of provisors and praemunire were enacted. These were a sort of double-breast work. The first was meant to keep out the flood of usurpations that was setting in from Rome upon England, and the second was intended to close the door against the tithes, revenues, appeals, and obedience which were flowing in an ever-growing stream from England to the Vatican. Great Britain had never before performed an act of resistance to the papacy, but with it came a quickening of her energies and a strengthening of her liberty. This was the moment chosen by Urban V to advance his insolent demand. How often have popes failed to read the signs of the times? Urban had signally failed to do so. The nation, though still submitting to the spiritual burdens of Rome, was becoming restive under her supremacy and pecuniary exactions. The Parliament had entered on a course of legislation to set bounds to these avaricious encroachments. The king, too, was getting sore at this defacing of the ancient laws and spoiling of his crown, and with the laurels of Crecy on his brow, he was in no mood for repairing to Rome as Urban commanded, and paying down 1,000 marks for permission to wear the crown which he was so well able to defend with his sword. Edward assembled his parliament in 1366, and laying the Pope's letter before it, bade it take counsel and say what answer should be returned. "Give us," says the Estates of the Realm, "a day to think over the matter." The king willingly granted them that space of time. They assembled again on the morrow, prelates, lords, and commons. Shall England, now become mistress of the seas, bow at the feet of the Pope? It is a great crisis. We eagerly scan the faces of the council, for the future of England hangs on its resolve. Shall the nation retrograde to the days of John, or shall it go forward to even higher glory than it has achieved under Edward? Wickliffe was present on that occasion, and has preserved a summary of the speeches. The record is interesting, as perhaps the earliest reported debate in Parliament, and still more interesting from the gravity of the issues depending thereon. A military baron is the first to rise. The King of England, he said, opening the debate, was won by the sword, and by that sword has been defended. Let the Pope, then, gird on his sword, and come and try to exact this tribute by force. And I, for one, am ready to resist him. This is not spoken like an obedient son of the Church, but all the more a loyal subject of England. Scarcely more encouraging to the supporters of the papal claim was the speech of the second Baron. He only, he said, is entitled to secular tribute who legitimately exercises secular rule and is able to give secular protection. The Pope cannot legitimately do either. He is a minister of the gospel, not a temporal ruler. His duty is to give ghostly counsel, not corporal protection. Let us see that he abide within the limits of his spiritual office, where we shall obey him. But if he shall choose to transgress these limits, he must take the consequences. Yeah, I love it. The Pope, said a third, following in the line of the second speaker, calls himself the servant of the servants of God. Very well, he can claim recompense only for service done. But where are the services which he renders to this land? Does he minister to us in spirituals? Does he help us in temporals? Does he not rather greedily drain our treasures, and often for the benefit of our enemies? I give my voice against this tribute. On what grounds was this tribute originally demanded? Asked another. Was it not for absolving King John and relieving the kingdom from interdict? But to bestow spiritual benefits for money is sheer simony. It is a piece of ecclesiastical swindling. Let the lords, spiritual and temporal, wash their hands of a transaction so disgraceful, but if it is as feudal superior to the kingdom that the Pope demands this tribute, why ask 1,000 marks? Why not ask the throne, the soil, and the people of England? If his title be good for these 1,000 marks, it is good for a great deal more. The Pope, on the same principle, may declare the throne vacant and fill it with whomsoever he pleases. Pope Urban tells us, so spoke another, that all kingdoms are Christ's, that he as his vicar holds England for Christ. But as the Pope is peccable and may abuse his trust, it appears to me that it were better that we should hold our land directly and alone of Christ. Let us, said the last speaker, go at once to the root of the matter. King John had no right to gift away the kingdom of England without the consent of the nation. That consent was never given. The golden seal of the king, and the seals of the few nobles whom John persuaded or coerced to join him in this transaction, do not constitute the national consent. If John gifted his subjects to Innocent like so many chattels, Innocent may come and take his property if he can. We, the people of England, had no voice in the matter. We hold the bargain null and void from the beginning. So spake Edward III's Parliament. Not a voice was raised in support of the arrogant demand of Urban. Prelate, baron, and commoner united in repudiating it as insulting to England, and these men expressed themselves in that plain, brief, and pithy language which betokens deep convictions as well as determined resolution. If need were, these bold words would be followed by deeds equally bold. The hands of the barons were on the hilts of their swords as they uttered them. They were, in the first place, subjects of England, and in the second place, members of the Church of Rome. The Pope accounts no one a good Catholic who does not reverse this order and put his spiritual above his temporal allegiance, his church before his country. This firm attitude of the Parliament put an end to the matter. The questions which Urban had really raised was this, and nothing less than this: shall the Pope or the King be sovereign of England? The answer of the Parliament was, not the Pope, but the King. And from that hour the claim of the former was not again advanced, at least in explicit terms. The decision at which the Parliament arrived was unanimous. It reproduced in brief both the argument and spirit of the speeches. Few such replies were in those days carried to the foot of the papal throne. Forasmuch, so ran the decision of the three estates of the realm, as neither King John nor any king could bring his realm and kingdom into such thraldom and subjection but by common assent of Parliament, the which was not given. Therefore, that which he did was against his oath at his coronation, besides many other causes. If therefore the Pope should attempt anything against the king by process, or other matters indeed, the king with all his subjects should, with all their force and power, resist the same. Thus far had England in the middle of the 15th century advanced on the road to the Reformation. The estates of the realm had unanimously repudiated one of the two great branches of the papacy. I just have to make a comment here that the same battle is going on today. Yes, the papacy may have lost her 1260-year reign, overt reign, which we are speaking of here in this history, but she now rules in secret by shadow government in the world. And the same struggle is going on in England today. England has almost been conquered by her, and they do not even know the battle that they are fighting and whom they are fighting with, because the head wound has been healed fully. And the eighth king, beast, in succession, doth rule today as ruled then, but with intrigue and many layers of deniable culpability. Is there any hope? Yes, there is hope. The scripture gives us that hope in the Revelation. It says that the 10 divisions of Western Europe, depicted as horns on the beast, the 10 divisions, the 10 horns of Western Europe will turn on the whore and raze her to the ground, destroy her with fire, totally wipe her off the face of the earth. That God is going to put it in their heart to do this thing. And I long for the day, and I pray that is not far off, because we're talking about the same struggle that Great Britain was fighting then that is coming to a head now. Only now she does not recognize her enemy. May God open her eyes. May God open the eyes of Western Europe to see who their enemy really is, who is now destroying their countries and destroying their religion. Yes, their Christian religion. It is the same enemy as of old, only now working behind the scene through intrigue by her shadow government. And I pray to God to open their eyes. And I'm praying for something that I know will happen. But the sooner I see it, the happier I will be. Because I know once that happens, that the coming of the Lord is even that much closer. Yeah. So we look for that to happen. Okay. Well, there's my little aside. Thus far had England in the middle of the 14th century advanced on the road to the Reformation. The estates of the realm had unanimously repudiated of the two great branches of the papacy. The dogma and the vicarship binds up the spiritual and the temporal in one anomalous jurisdiction. England had denied the latter, and this was a step toward questioning and finally repudiating the former. It was quite natural that the nation should first discover the falsity of the temporal supremacy before seeing the the equal falsity of the spiritual. Urban had put the matter in a light in which no one could possibly mistake it. In demanding payment of 1,000 marks annually, he translated, as we say, the theory of the temporal supremacy into a palpable fact. The theory might have passed a little longer without question, had it not been put into this ungracious form. The halo which encompassed the papal fabric during the Middle Ages began to wane, and men took courage to criticize a system whose immense prestige had blinded them hitherto. Such was the state of mind of the English nation. Its reformation was not far off. Wickliffe had greatly and mainly contributed to bring about this state of mind in England. He had been a teacher of the barons and commons. He had propounded these doctrines from his chair in Oxford before they were proclaimed by the assembled estates of the realm. But for the spirit and views with which he had been quietly leavening the nation, the demand of Urban might have met a different reception. It would not, we believe, have been complied with. The position England had now attained in Europe, and the deference paid her by foreign nations, would have made submission impossible. But without Wickliffe, the resistance would not have been placed on so intelligible a ground, nor would it have been urged with so resolute a patriotism. The firm attitude assumed effectually extinguished the hopes of the Vatican, and rid England ever after of all such irritating and insolent demands. That Wickliffe's position in this controversy was already a prominent one, and that the sentiments expressed in Parliament were but the echo of his teachings in Oxford, are attested to by an event which then took place. This just so is screaming to me of the times that we're in now, and what our recent martyr, Mr. Kirk, or Church himself, is doing not only to this nation but to the world. Perhaps this is the turning point where the world sees. I pray that it is, that people will dig far enough to see where the real rottenness is emanating from the very man of sin himself, and that great apostasy that resides around him at the Vatican. There, I said it. She is the fount of all of the world's troubles, and she can be just as easily thrown off. And it is foretold that it will happen. I have hope that now maybe I am seeing the scales just beginning to fall away, and I pray that the scales continue to fall away till at least the world sees where their trouble is emanating from, and that they will turn on her as God has placed that thought in her heart to do his will and to burn her with fire. And this is a warning for all of those that are attached to her. Maybe it's time to leave, because the fire is coming, and nothing can stop that two-edged sword that comes out of the mouth of him who sits on that white horse. God has spoken his word, and surely, as it is spoken, it will be done. The Pope did find a supporter in England, though not in Parliament. A monk, whose name has not come down to us, stood forward to demonstrate the righteousness of the claim of Urban V. This controversialist laid down the fundamental proposition that, as Vicar of Christ, the Pope is the feudal superior of monarchs, and the Lord Paramount of their kingdoms. Thence he deduced the following conclusions: that all sovereigns owe him their obedience and tribute, that vassalage was especially due from the English monarch in consequence of the surrender of the kingdom to the Pope by John, that Edward had clearly forfeited his throne by the non-payment of the annual tribute, and, in fine, that all ecclesiastics, regulars, and scholars were exempt from the civil jurisdiction, and under no obligation to obey the citation or answer before the tribunal of the magistrate. Singling out Wickliffe by name, the monk challenged him to disprove the propositions he had advanced. Wickliffe took up the challenge. The task was one which involved tremendous hazard, not because Wickliffe's logic was weak or his opponents unanswerable, but because the power which he had attacked could ill brook to have its foundations searched out, and its hollowness exposed, and because the more completely Wickliffe should triumph, the more probable was it that he would feel the heavy displeasure of the enemy against whom he did battle. He had a cause pending in the Vatican at that very moment, and if he vanquished the Pope in England, how easy would it be for the Pope to vanquish him at Rome? Wickliffe did not conceal from himself this and other greater perils. Nevertheless, he stepped into the arena. In opening the debate, he styles himself the king's peculiar clerk, from which we infer that the royal eye had already lighted upon him, attracted by his erudition and talents, and that one of the royal chaplaincies had been conferred upon him. The controversy was conducted on Wickliffe's side with greater moderation. He contents himself with stating the grounds of objection to the temporal power, rather than working out the argument and pressing it home. These are the natural rights of men, the laws of the realm of England, and the precepts of Holy Writ. Already, he says, a third and more of England is in the hands of the Pope. There cannot, he argues, be two temporal sovereigns in one country. Either Edward is king or Urban is king. We make our choice. We accept Edward of England and refuse Urban of Rome. Then he falls back on the debate in Parliament, which presents a summary of the speeches of the spiritual and temporal lords. Thus far, Wickliffe puts the estates of the realm in the front, and covers himself with the shield of their authority. But doubtless the sentiments are his. The stamp of his individuality and genius is plainly to be seen upon them. From his bow was the arrow shot by which the temporal power of the papacy in England was wounded. If his courage was shown in not declining the battle, his prudence and wisdom were equally conspicuous in the manner in which he conducted it. It was the affair of the king and of the nation, and not his merely. And it was masterly tactics to put it so as that it might be seen to be no contemptible quarrel between an unknown monk and an Oxford doctor, but a controversy between the King of England and the Pontiff of Rome. And the service now rendered by Wickliffe was great. The eyes of all the European nations were at that moment on England, watching with no little anxiety the issue in conflict which she was then waging with a power that sought to reduce the whole earth to vassalage. If England should bow herself before the papal chair, and the victor of Crécy do homage to Urban for his crown, what monarch could hope to stand erect? And what nation could expect to rescue its independence from the grasp of the tiara? The submission of England would bring such an accession of prestige and strength to the papacy that the days of Innocent III would return, and a tempest of excommunication and interdicts would again lower over every throne and darken the sky of every kingdom, as during the reign of the mightiest of the papal chairs. The crisis was truly a great one. It was now to be seen whether the tide was to advance or not. The decision of England determined that the waters of papal tyranny should henceforth recede, and every nation hailed the result with joy as a victory won for itself. To England, the benefits which accrued from this conflict were lasting as well as great. The fruits reaped from the great battles of Crécy and Poitiers have long since disappeared, but as regards this victory won over Urban V, England is enjoying at this very hour the benefits which resulted from it. But it must not be forgotten that, though Edward III and his Parliament occupied the foreground, the real champion in this battle was Wickliffe. It is hardly necessary to say that Wickliffe was non-suited at Rome. His wardenship of Canterbury Hall, to which he was appointed by the founder, and from which he had been extruded by the Archbishop of Langham, was finally lost. His appeal to the Pope was made in 1367, but a long delay took place, and it was not until 1370 that the judgment of the Court of Rome was pronounced, ratifying his extrusion and putting Langham's monks in sole possession of Canterbury College. Wickliffe had lost his wardenship, but he had largely contributed to save the independence of the country. In winning this fight, he had done more for it than if he had conquered on many battlefields. He had yet greater services to render to England, and yet greater penalties to pay for his patriotism. Soon after this, he took his degree of Doctor in Divinity, a distinction rarer in those days than in ours, and the chair of theology, to which he was raised to extend the circle of his influence and pave the way for the fulfillment of his great mission at the center of a new age. That's the end of chapter 3 there. Wow. Yeah, going through that history there really brings to the forefront exactly what is going on in Great Britain today. If they could see, the similarity of what was going on then, and call on the same forces, the same spirit today to overthrow that same evil that's overtaking them, only in a different way, through intrigue. They're fighting against people that have been placed in their government by the shadow government that rules over most of the earth. And wherever there is more trouble, more tyranny, you know that the fingerprint of that shadow government is there behind the scenes, working frivolously. And they always fall because of their corruption, because they always have to resort to corruption, and their corruption always caves in on itself, as we see it doing in America at this very minute. Praise be to God. So I just like to take a moment and just pray for our brothers in the British Isles, in Great Britain, and throughout Western Europe, especially our brothers in Christ. And that for those that are suffering there, that they will see where their true suffering is coming from, that they may find the true remedy. And of course, the true remedy is in Christ, that they should turn to Christ. That's my prayer for Great Britain and Western Europe. I long for the day in that prophecy, one of the last prophecies of the Revelation that must be fulfilled before Christ comes, to be fulfilled. And that is the destruction of the great mystery Babylon harlot with her man of sin and her great apostasy. And for all of those people that are innocently involved in her great apostasy, I pray that God opens their eyes and they answer the call as the Reformers began to do in the 16th century, and before that, and ever since then, to answer the call to come out of her, my people. Yes, God says, I have my people that are involved. They were born into it, and there are some there that are involved in it innocently, and they truly have a love for Jesus. They truly love Christ and truly understand what he has done for them in laying down his life for their sins, and their sins are truly covered by his blood. Otherwise, he would not say to them, to call them, come out of her, my people. Please, please answer the call. What more can I pray for than that? We'll be moving on to chapter 4 next time, because I'm running out of time, so I really don't want to go on. So next time we'll pick up with Wickliffe. This whole book is on Wickliffe, book 2 on Wickliffe. This is chapter 4 of 15 chapters on the life of Wickliffe. So you're going to make sure you want to stick around and come back, or even purchase that. Book 2 is on Wickliffe, and you see this is a very exciting account and narration of the times and life of Wickliffe in England, and it's just so revealing as to what is going on in the day that we live in, that it's just kind of mind-blowing to me, that as I've been going this week through even Genesis and the history of Protestantism, how much the Spirit of God is speaking to me and speaking of the times that we're in. History may not repeat itself, and certainly it does not, but it certainly does rhyme. Has England been through this before? Yes. Great Britain, Western Europe has been through all of this before, and they're all suffering from the same vassalage to the same authority and power that plagued it then is the same one that is plaguing it now. The head healing has happened. Yeah, it has happened. And she has a great hold. Look at what she did to America. It was her. It was that spirit of Antichrist ruling in the world. It was in America. It's in Washington, D.C. It's in China. Wherever you see, God lays at the feet of that power all of the genocides that have happened, from Stalin to Pol Pot to Mao Zedong, to the slaying of the Jews, to the so-called Holocaust, to all of the Holocaust. God lays at her feet in the very revelation itself, and of all those that are slain in the earth, saying that she is responsible for most of the people that are slain in the earth, are laid at her feet, and her work and her shadow government since her 1260-year reign, which was overt. Her slaughters were then noticed for the world. That's why people believe in Counter-Reformation prophecy, a prophecy that denies and leaves out the last 2,000 years. Why? Why would the Antichrist want to leave this history out? Keep it hidden from the face of the world, because it exposes her for what and who she really is. She is the great harlot. Her man of sin sits in the chair, in the seat of the visible church on earth. Because what do people think when they hear church on earth? Those that are not part of the church, what do they think of? They think of the Catholic Church, the Church Universal, the Church of Rome. And they see the man of sin seated in the temple of God. The New Testament temple of God in the Revelation is the church. And there is a clear distinction in the Revelation made between the true church and the great apostasy, the Antichrist church with its man of sin. And the world is going to clearly see it, especially Western Europe. Its eyes is going to be opened. God says, if I go to that space in Revelation, well, you'll see it there. We can talk about it. And I've talked about it many, many times before, that God is going to put it in their hearts to turn on her and destroy her with fire. And I don't believe it's just going to be, situated there at the Vatican, but wherever she is on the many waters that cover the whole earth, wherever she has universities, wherever she has monasteries, wherever she has churches and edifices and owns nations, people are going to turn on her worldwide. That's what I see. That's the sign that we're given. That's what it means in the Revelation. So hear it louder and clearer than ever before. If you're in it, and many people are coming out of it. Well, no, a lot of people are turning to it right now at this time, because they don't see where the things that have been happening in America have really come to, that led to this martyrdom that is upsetting the whole world now, and upsetting the church, and turning many people to churches. But many of them are turning to the harlot church himself. And I can say to those that are turning there, if you're turning there because of the things that you see in the world, you have to recognize where it's coming from. It's coming from the man of sin and that great apostasy. And God calls you, if you're truly his, to come out of her and join yourself to his church, that is the Reformed church, that is based on the Word of God and based on the infant church of the apostles and his word, rather than the fables of Rome. Well, I am running out of time quickly here, and I hope you've all enjoyed this segment. And forgive me for preaching there a little bit at the end, but I couldn't help myself. Could not help myself. Well, may the Almighty bless you all and keep you all as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. I plan on being back in this chair tomorrow, so I hope to see you then.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Secrets of the Rapture. Is there a 500-year-old conspiracy? A propaganda machine so pervasive and entrenched, yet so elusive that the entire world could be taken in by it, working in plain sight, but unseen by the world for what it truly is? If prophecy is God-given history in advance, why does the prophecy that has conquered the age also exclude nearly 2,000 years of history? What is it that they are afraid that the light of history will reveal? To understand our place in time and prophecy, we must look in history for an interpretation, that which stands the test of time, that which agrees with the Word of God, and history has proven to be true. When cunning fables and fearful speculations are removed from our sight, then we may clearly see what is truly expressed in Bible prophecy, both that which has been fulfilled and that which has yet to come. God's express word is the sword that must be wielded to remove the scales from the eyes and dispel the darkness of deceitful conjecture. Secrets of the Rapture was written to expose that which the spirit of the age has conjured out of the darkness to blind the eyes of the church in the world today. Secrets of the Rapture, Deconstructing Pre-Tribulation Dispensational Futurism by yours truly, Nicholas Arthur, is now available at lulu.com and Amazon. Secrets of the Rapture. Be informed, edified, and grow in the faith as your spirit is daily nourished in a biblical worldview, because you love the truth. FirstAmendmentRadio.net /MOBI. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Always listenable, at work or on the go. FirstAmendmentRadio.net/Moby. No download or app necessary.